Quick, everybody, nurse, we've got a patient. He needs water, free. Give me an IV, Setting up IV drip. Set him to a dosage. 100 milliliters per hour. Okay, fluids are coming through. And he's dripping. I think he'll pull through. So today, if you hadn't guessed, we're going to be looking at these IV bags and these drippers to see if they're any good and if they're worth getting. So let's get on and have a look at them. And a big thanks to pepper plant that's we've left drying out a little bit to do the intro. Give you good water now. So these are these IV bags that seem to be the new rage, and it's a bit of a case of, well, it works for people, why can't we do it even work for plants? So basic consistency of these is a bag which you can fill with water, and then a fine tube that you go down, and it comes through these restrictive drippers. Now these drippers have all got from, bring this bag a bit closer, from off to all the way up 5mm, 10mm, 20mm, all the way up to 250mm, or just open. And the idea is that you hang the bags up, and then that water slowly drips through into the drippers and feeds your plants. So let's have a look at one of those in more detail. So we had one of the drippers that wasn't working properly, and reliability on these is something that's a lot of people have highlighted in the review. So we take a look at each component and see exactly how it works. So this is the bottom half that goes into the little tiny dripper. Now the dripper, actually, if you see, is actually a sort of full circle, but it's got a gap here, and when the tube goes on, essentially that provides the gap for the water to drip out of, and then it just goes into the state like that. Now the problem we had with this one was that actually down in this bottom bit, this bottom plastic bit was still closed up, so we had to put a bit of wire through it to actually unjam it. And the basic principle of this is that this bottom piece, as you see, it's got a sort of plastic foam disc, and it's got a tiny small hole in the bottom there, which where the water drips through, and then the corresponding top bit also has a plastic washer, and this is where the pipe comes down through the top, that has got a small hole in it. And then when these are pushed together and snapped together, essentially when they're lined up with each other like that, the sensor shows that it's open, and the more you turn that round until it's at 5mm, at 5mm the actual parts of the actual drip bit is further away. And as you can see, if you don't see on here, is that there's like a sort of spiral sort of loop in here. And essentially what the principle is the further away the actual top part dripping piece, which goes in here, is away from the bottom part dripping piece, the longer it will take and the harder it is for the water to get round to the outlet. And therefore that's how you control the flow. Now these bags come with either single drippers or a double dripper like this set. These are like 3.5 litre bags. Now obviously one of the things you have to be very careful of is the fact that all these components and the sort of dripping thing in here is actually really small tubes. So if you can see the actual where's the bit that we need, so on the floor. So this is the hose. I'll line this up with the camera, and as you can see, based on my fingernail, that's a really fine, and the holes in here are really fine. So if you've got any debris in the bag, that's potentially going to block it up. Now, to give it a fair chance, I'll show you what we did. So we got one of these filters, and we used one of these really fine mesh filters in this when we filled them up, to make sure that any rubbish and debris, as you can see in there, was actually not in the bag, and it was actually as pure water as possible to stop any build up of sludge. And then we set it up in our polytunnel. So here in the polytunnel, we hung it up from the cross beam, filled the bag up completely, 3.5 litres yesterday. See, it's nearly empty. Then down into 2 buckets, we just left the drippers going. We put this one on just under 100, and we put this one on 30 to see, did they bring out the right amount of water? Can you believe the actual settings, or does it make any difference? So let's have a look at the 2 buckets and measure those out. So this is the amount of water that we've got in the 100 millilitre bucket. So let's get our jug and measure that out. So this is just a ½ litre jug. Now obviously we're going to lose a bit through evaporation, but that's, we'll say half. 1 litre, 1.5 litres, 2 litres, and let's have a look. That's 2 litres, 150 millilitres, so 2.1 litres. And let's have a look at this one. So this is the one that was at 30. So ½ litre. And then that is 600. So in the one that was, so we had 600 in the 30 milliliter one, and so we'd expect there to be about 1800 in the other one, which is on about 3 times the rate. And actually, in fact, there was 2100, so about 3.5 times. But I think that's pretty close. I mean, I think that's close enough really for it to actually say that actually it was dripping at about 3 times the rate. So in terms of that, I think the actual flow and the actual control of the flow works really well. And to be honest, most plants require, depending on a small plant, between 100 and 200 millilitres, but you could have up to 500 millilitres for a particular plant, depending on how big it is and what size pot it is and everything else. So in terms of the actual flow, they seem to work as long as you keep the water clean. Now there have been a lot of people that have said over time they clog up and they stop working, so that's one thing to be careful of. So let's start listing down a few advantages and disadvantages on either side of the screen. So in terms of controlling the flow rate, they do work. So in terms of cost, now they're coming in at about, depending on where you buy them, you can get them from the Chinese import sites or from Amazon and stuff like that. But they come in at around £3 to £4 for one of these bags. If you have the single dripper ones, they're a little bit cheaper. I think these were about £4 each for 2 plants. So in terms of cost, they're not, I wouldn't say they were cheap, because if you think about it, you could probably pick up like sort of something like one of these, which is like a irrigation USB control powered or solar powered irrigation system for your pot plants. They can pick these up for about 25-30 quid. So for the price of about 6 or 7 bags of these bags, you could get one of those controllers, which would probably water up to about 15 pots. So in terms of cost, I don't think they're, I'm going to put that as a negative. They are quite expensive for what they are, really. Now, one advantage that they've got over, let me just grab one of the bottles. One advantage they have over these type of dripper systems, where you've got like sort of sticks where they put drips in there, is capacity. Now, you could put a bigger bottle on here, but by the time you get to about over 1 litre of a bottle of water, it becomes quite top heavy, whereas this is like 3.5 litres. So 3.5 litres, if you had it dripping at say 100 millilitres an hour, so you'd use up, just to say, depending on how you had it set up, that would be emptied over a period of about sort of day and a half, 2 days, whereas this dripping at a similar sort of rate, that would be gone in like under 5 hours. That would be finished, whereas this would keep going for like a day and a half to 2 days. So there is the advantage there that you've got a bigger bag, and of course if you only want to do a small amount of feed, if you just had one per pot, you could spread that out. You think 3.5 litres. How long do you want your plants to be watered for? Receive 3.5 litres of water. You could extend that to maybe a week or more if it's not a particularly thirsty plant. So in terms of capacity, they're great. The other advantage is in the fact that they're plastic rather than a bottle. What you very often find with the bottle ones is because if there isn't a chance for the air to get in, you get a little bit of a vacuum seal at the top of the bottles, and that means that the drip rate actually just lowers. The emptier the bottle gets, the harder it is for the water to come out because of the suction effect of the vacuum in the top of the actual bottle. Whereas these obviously are plastic bags, so they just collapse. They'll just collapse in on themselves. So the drip rate is going to be pretty constant all the way through. So in terms of capacity, obviously that's an advantage. As I say, in terms of costs, probably not. Now, there have been in terms of reliability. Now, I've had this running overnight. I've not seen any problems with it. We made sure that we had clean water in it, but quite a few people have had issues with them saying that they stopped working after a little while, or they got blocked. And certainly in terms of actual reliability, the one that we had to take apart, the little plastic bit at the bottom here, was blocked up, so it wasn't even letting you blow down through the tube. Now we've just had to get a little bit of wire and push that through just to unblock it. But again, that's in terms of reliability, you don't know when you get your sets whether they're all going to be working, or you're going to have to take them, and you don't want to be taking them all apart and fiddling with them and stuff like that and potentially breaking them, because they're not easy to get apart, because they've actually got these little clips here, and you have to try and unclip all of those little clips at the same time to actually get them to separate apart. But they do clip back together again afterwards. So in terms of reliability, I think there's a big question mark there. We'll put it as a disadvantage because I have seen quite a few reviews, but I would suggest if you do want to try and use them for like a little bit of time before, if you go away. So let's talk about what one of the advantages they do have over a mini irrigation system, and that is portability. Now, you do need something obviously to hang them up from, and they do advise that you actually have the bags at least a metre above the actual drip area so that the full effects of gravity can take effect. But if you've got a couple of pots just over in a corner, that's ideal, because you can just put this over in that corner and you haven't got to trail irrigation lines all the way there, or group all your plants together in one place, because obviously the mini irrigation systems are great if all the plants are in the same vicinity, but if they're all dotted around, maybe not. But having these bags hanging up all over the place, they're not the prettiest things, so they're not aesthetically, they're not great. So we'll put that down. We'll put the actual flexibility in terms of that they're more portable in the positives, but we took aesthetics and look in the negative side. So having said that, you could probably, if you can conceal them behind something or other, put them behind a bush or hang them on a fence and behind, they'll probably be all okay. So that's so thinking of other things that we could use them for. So I think for general purpose watering, they're probably not great, because there's so many other options around that are cheaper in terms of those drip bottles or micro irrigation systems and everything else. But there are a couple of things where I think these could really be useful. The first of those is if you've got a pot that is completely dried out. So if you've got pots that have completely dried out and the soil's gone really hydrophobic, in the sense that you pour water onto the pot and the water runs straight through, you end up having to either stand the pot in water for a long time for that soil to actually soak some of that moisture up. And that's not always practical if it's a very big pot. In those circumstances, I think these things are a lifesaver. Because the drip rate is constant, with the micro irrigation system, the water is going to gush out twice a day, or however frequently you put it on. And therefore, all that water is going to go through it, and potentially if it's really dry, it's just going to run straight through. But with this, it is constantly dripping 24 hours a day. And therefore that type of moisturising of a dry pot could potentially be a lifesaver. So we will be using, if we've got any particular stuff that's completely dried out, I will be using these, because this will give a constant feed of water over and over again, and it will really give that soil chance to actually rehydrate itself. Whereas like traditional watering, where you're just watering over top, watering over top, watering over top, can really not be that sufficient, especially if the water's draining out the bottom, or you have to try and stand the pot in a vessel of some sort for it to soak. And then what generally happens is the soil at the bottom gets really soaked, but you still end up with like no moisture at the top. So for that, I think they could be a lifesaver. The other thing that I thought this is useful for is if you're going away for a long time and you've got an irrigation system set up like we have here in the polytunnel or micro irrigation system, that'll be watering your plants, but it won't necessarily be feeding them. Now you could put feed into the source barrel and let it feed that way, but you might not want to contaminate your water butts and everything else with feed, because you might be using it for other stuff. But what you could do is, in tandem with a watering system, you could put your feed in one of these bags and then put them on a really slow drip rate. And therefore, they're not responsible for watering the plants, but they are responsible for giving a little bit of feed over a long period of time. So I think that potentially is a good fix, especially if you're going away for an extended period of time. So if you're going away just for a week, it's not going to make much difference, because you can feed them before you go and you can feed them when you get back and they'll be fine. But if you're going away for 2 or 3 weeks or longer, and you've got all your watering system set up so your plants are going to be watered fine, it might be useful to have one of these dripping away slowly so that it gives you some feed. You can set it down to a really slow drip rate, mix up some concentrated liquid feed in here and just let it by the plants, and as they get watered by a micro irrigation system, they'll also get being fed by these. So that is my list of advantages and disadvantages, and a couple of applications where I think they really, really could work. So let me know in your comments down below whether you think they're a good idea or not. Is it a great idea to have these little IV drip type sort of things for your plant, or is it just like applying a good application or good idea to the wrong application? In other words, these are great for hospitals and when you need someone to have an inline feed of fluids, but is it really taking it a step too far, giving it to plants? Let me know in the comments below, see what you think. But I won't be using them for general watering, but I can certainly think of a couple of applications where I can use them effectively. So we'll be keeping them for the time being for when we need them for those sort of things. Catch you again later.